Hey everybody, I'm Bill Calkins with Ball Tech On Demand, and I am excited and, to be honest, a little bit bummed to wrap up our month of short educational sessions that we started at the beginning of the month to help you get prepared to grow your best crops ever to send to market next spring. By the end of the month, we are gonna have covered 9 topics, and hopefully you've taken some time each week to hear from the Ball Tech On Demand experts on some critical topics, including this one: getting prepared for spring production, from sanitation and equipment calibration to dialing in your pest management strategy and ordering smarter to reduce shrink. These are big topics for sure, but our experts can help make sense of it all. So let's go ahead and meet today's presenters. First off, we have Dr. Todd Cavins, who's also a technical manager with Ball and has a wide-ranging understanding of real-world solutions, and growers always tell me that they appreciate his style and approach. Todd, how's it going out there? Even though you're not traveling, I'm sure you've got some intel to share.
Oh, absolutely. It's actually, other than a little bit of weather we're dealing with in the South, we've got some ice storms and hurricanes we're dealing with. The customers are really excited about next spring. I talked to some of the sales team members and they said, hey, orders are coming in strong. So that gets me excited too. I'm also looking forward to spring.
Absolutely, absolutely. Me too. And I think fall is really doing well, and we're looking at some excitement for the holiday season. It's going to be a good wrap up to the year. Our next guest is Dr. Will Healy, a senior technical manager at Ball and a frequently seen presenter for Ball Tech On Demand videos. He's covered a bunch of different topics, from specific crop production to watering, photoperiod, propagation, and a whole lot more. Will, welcome. And what's going on in greenhouses these days as folks prepare for spring 2021?
Well, thanks a lot, Bill. This is the great time of the year where you've got a little bit of a low time between poinsettias now need to be shipped and the craziness of spring is going to take off. When we take a look around the world, what's the attitude in the Southern Hemisphere, where of course they're just getting into a nice warm spring season. Their sales are going right straight through the ceiling. They're absolutely excited beyond belief. Consumers are out buying plants. As someone had said, the silver lining of COVID is it's made people realize that decorating around their homes is an excellent opportunity. So, I'm really excited by this presentation that we're going to do here today, because this is when we need to really start focusing on how can we do better, faster, and make sure that we don't have any bumps in this road that we call greenhouse production.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Thanks a lot. I think you guys probably hit the nail on the head when it comes to what folks are thinking about these days. But let's get going since we have a lot to cover. Real quick, a couple notes. All the videos and webinars from this October series are collected and posted at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand for future viewing or to share with the rest of your team. And look for the playlist menu on the right-hand side of the video, or just go to Ball Seeds YouTube channel and subscribe, and you will never miss a future video. So at this point, I think, Will, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can share your slide, and let's get going.
Excellent. One of the challenges of doing a talk like this is there's a million things that need to be done. You really can't imagine how many different things that need to be done. So, Todd and I spent, pretty much all month talking about, okay, so what should we talk about? Todd, should we be those generals who always fight the last war, or what's our strategy today?
Well, you got to look back a little bit, right, to see how well things went last year. Evaluate, did you have the right crops? Did you plant them at the right time? So a little bit of looking backwards so we can look forward and be able to do some predictive predictions out there, maybe about how I can do things better this spring. Maybe that's what we ought to look towards.
Well, and I think we also need to be looking at the old coinage of the comment of, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So let's talk about the first ounce of prevention that really is critical in everyone's greenhouse operation.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about sanitation. Now, we've had we've had some podcasts. I think we have some standalone presentations also that go more in depth to sanitation, but let's just talk about it in some general terms here. Process and training. I heard a great phrase from James Dukas, who's a ball floor plant product and technical representative. He said, make your evaluation and training complex and make the day-to-day operations simple. And so let's dig into that. Let's find out where we need to do these kind of processes for cleanup and training of our staff. And, let's do a little bit of research. Right here, I have a list of chemicals that, may or may not be appropriate depending on what you're trying to achieve here. And in this table, you can see that on the left-hand side of it, it talks about if the various chemicals attack bacteria, fungus, virus, if they're good for floors, carts, hands. So there's absolutely a good choice out there that may or may not be appropriate for your particular task at hand. So absolutely look into these things and see which one are best for you and your team. Now also take a look, when you look which columns have the best or the most checks all the way down the column. Things like quaternary ammoniums are really popular these days, and that's because they're very effective. Do need to use them with gloves. The oxidizing type solutions, so the kind of the peroxide types, there's a newer generation out there that have the peroxyacetic acid or stabilizers in them. These are much better than the products of old. So yes, they are very effective and very stable as well. So several good choices out there. Take a look and see what works best for your organization.
So
right.
Now that we've got the chemicals, what about how do we do this? How do we set up our program?
Yeah. So, choosing the right chemical, but you got to choose to apply it at the right time in the right process, right? So take a look at your applicators out there. You could just spray it on, okay? Or you could foam it on, or you could have a very intensive, like we see here, a power washer. It really kind of depends on the surface. If you have a very porous surface, lots of cracks, crevices, nooks and crannies, things like the foamers are really great because the foam gets out there. There's a lot of contact time. If you have a solid surface, maybe it's a greenhouse wall, something like a power washer where you can really, blast the algae and debris off of there. That's a really good choice. And maybe it doesn't need quite as much contact time because it's a solid surface. So, take a look at those situations. How are you going to get the right contact time with the right chemical on the right surface? Let's talk about what to clean. You see first on our list there, it says staff. And, yeah, that means, washing hands and things like that, gloving up, using sanitation solutions, but it means doing that consistently. Every single day this has to be done. I know as we've looked back over the last few years and some of the disease outbreaks we've helped customers deal with, we looked, where did it come from? Did it come from the plants? Did it come from the soil? Most of the time, these diseases end up being tracked in and around by our staff members. So that is a critical component of it. Make sure you have a very good method to prevent the disease spread by your hands, okay? By your hands, by your clothing, several things. Also think about, the walls, the curtain, the bench, anything the plant material, the flats, the containers touch, that has to be cleaned. Also think about a little bit of spring cleaning. Obviously the equipment, like I said, that the plants touch, but let's look up. What about your light fixtures? If you have high pressure sodium lights, have you cleaned those off lately? Have you tested them to make sure they're working correctly? What about sensors out there? Are they tuned up and ready to go? You may have not used some of this equipment for a few months, but now's the time to get it tuned up. And the last one I'll say about what to clean is the pipes, the irrigation pipes. You can see a picture right here in this middle of this slide. There's a pipe that's got a lot of buildup, and this one happens to have buildup from mineral buildup and corrosion in it. There are products out there such as acidified soap like Strip It that really do a great job of cleaning out not only this kind of debris, but they also do a really good job of cleaning out the biofilm. And we have seen time and time again where those biofilms can harbor diseases, that we don't often think about being in the water, but they can be in the biofilm attached to your pipe. So cleaning is critical there. So again, let's think about that plan, annual cleanup, hopefully we already did that, but let's think about doing it again and get spring cleaning. Let's have a daily program that is easy to follow so we don't have to think about it. And then let's be prepared for those hot spots also that are inevitably going to pop up.
Yeah, because I just want to throw a word of alert on the pipes. Is if you've had pipes and you've got a lot of white pipe in your operation and it's all above ground, you really want to make sure that you go after that biofilm. We have an operation that had a serious problem with fusarium, and what they traced it back to is that the spores basically embedded themselves into the biofilm on the inside. Think of them as nuggets of disaster, because then all of a sudden that biofilm would let loose, and suddenly you're putting fusarium spores on crops 6 months, 2 months, 5 months after you had just gotten rid of the whole problem. So this is where the hidden disease problems are sitting out there in the biofilm. So really focus on that, especially in older operations where you really haven't paid much attention to it, got a lot of algae in your operation. Make sure you go. Talking about other things that we should be doing preventatively on a regular basis is, let's look at our equipment and, is it calibrated? Is it working? As Todd touched on this, have you checked the light intensity of every single one of your lights? Remember, you've got a huge cost of energy going into turning those lights on. And I would wager that if you were to look at this picture, what you would see is that, yeah, they're all yellow, right? Does everyone agree that they're all yellow? But you notice how that there's kind of a brighter yellow spot in the back and kind of some spots where there's a little brighter and a little darker. Well, guess what? Some of those lights are putting out all the energy that they need. Other ones are not. So you're basically not getting an efficacy, which is light out for energy in. And that's just costing you pure money. So really go in and look at that. Remember, they don't last forever, although we wish they would. But sometimes they're just yellow glow balls, not really providing that critical light that we need. Also check to see, are your vents working? Are the exhaust fans all set up? Are those belts sliding? Check what the amperage pull on those fans to make sure that they are actually pulling the air so that you're getting your maximum benefit. Make sure your horizontal airflow fans are actually moving air. One of our operations, they weren't getting any water loss at the crop because they had the fans sitting all the way up right on the truss. And by just lowering the fans down, they increased the uniformity of the temperature at the crop, and they increase the amount of drying in the greenhouse. If you're an operation that suffers from a very slow drying, the vertical airflow fans, VAFs, which basically flow the air up and down, basically are using extensively within Europe because they find that they get better drying, better performance. Yes, horizontal airflow moves heat, but this vertical airflow is very important. So think about, what is your problem that you're trying to solve? And there are solutions out there. Small investments can give you huge rewards. Check your heaters. Every year we run into problems where, one, if they're using a hot water system, they don't have the flow rates because they've got constriction in the pipes. So there's something that's not flowing, so the pipes are not getting hot as you think they are. And so you've got hot and cold spots within your operation. If you're using unit heaters, which a lot of growers are doing, make sure that you've got outside air coming right to the burner. Something as simple as a 1-inch pipe will give you that oxygen that you need and maintain the air there, or even a dryer tube, very critical. Notice this particular example, there's no oxygen to the tube. So if they go into a heavy constant burn, they have the risk of not getting complete combustion, producing NOx gases, NO, NO2. And that, if you have cracked exchangers, is blown out into the greenhouse. And of course, that gives you what everyone calls as ethylene damage. It's NOx, the gas damage. So really look at those burners carefully. They don't last forever, especially the newer ones. They can have cracked exchangers. Also go and take a look at your controls. Are they controlling? Are they set correct? Do you have a relative humidity control strategy? Because that just drives chemical usage. If you don't, doesn't dry the plants out. Have you got the diff set up correctly so that you can use and reduce your growth regular application because you're managing your temperatures using a diff? A lot of times you've changed them as you've gone through the spring, then the summer, we don't worry about them. And then all of a sudden you get to December and January and you go, why isn't this working? Oh, yeah, that's right. Look at your supplemental light. Make sure that you've got it set correctly so that for the shortest days of the year, you've got that night interruption at 5 hours, which you probably toned it down to 3 or 4 hours as you went later in the spring. And again, make sure you reset it. And also look at what your shade strategies are, because you might have been pulling the shade earlier as the light intensity got greater and greater and greater as you went through the summer. And now's the time to pull those shades open and give yourself a lot of light. So let's really think about that. And then what about then the whole issue of testing? I think that's probably our biggest challenge, isn't it, Todd?
Yeah, it is. For those of you who work with me from time to time, I'm a big fan of testing regularly. Test your water at least annually. If you have a new water source, I'd test that 3 or 4 times throughout the first year to know kind of where it's going, where it's going to land. Test your injector. You can, use a simple EC meter to check to make sure your injector is injecting the correct amount of fertilizer. Let me look at this example of these numbers up here. We won't go too far into it, but this is a grower that shared his data with us. He's got his raw water and he's got his different ranges out there. Let's just look at range 3 for an example. His target parts per million nitrogen was supposed to be 75 parts per million, and here he is down at 60. So what's happening there? He's not hitting his target. So those crops are going to be deficient, before too long. May not show up at first. It takes several weeks for a deficiency to show up in the crop. But if they're testing the EC on a regular basis, sending off tests from time to time, we can really prevent and see problems or prevent problems that may occur several weeks down the line. Let's also take a look at some soil values. If you could advance, there's our injector. And then, here's some soil values as well. I'm going to tell you, just test for pH and EC if nothing else, okay? We've got some information and videos on that. Keeping those 2 parameters in target: pH, that's the acidity of your soil; EC, that's the salt content of your soil. That's going to really give you a good insight to what's going on in general and can prevent a lot of nutrient problems with it here. For instance, on this particular test method, you see the EC, or electrical conductivity, is 0.56. Well, that's pretty low. And if we look down and look at the individual nutrients, which we got from a complete soil analysis, we can see that there's less than 25 parts per billion of the nitrogen in here. So, again, testing the pH and EC on a regular basis can really give you some insight without having to do these full tests all the time. Although I do encourage you to send some off from time to time to do a check, make sure that what you're seeing in your operation with your in-house testing matches what the laboratory sees.
So, testing shouldn't just be about Todd. It can also be about me. Those of you who have listened to me, and as my wife said, is there anyone in the world who hasn't heard you talk about water and watering? Well, there are some, and those who haven't, we do have some videos on training people on water. But, do you have water targets? Do you have a target that you want at the end of the water tunnel? Do you have a target that you want the people to water up to? Do you have a target that you want them to dry down to? Do you have the targets? But more critically, do you have the tools set up to actually achieve those numbers? If you take a look at your water tunnels coming off of your sowing and your sticking lines, for a sowing line, you really want that water to be straight down so you're not moving seed. Whereas on the other hand, if you've got a vegetative sticking line, you really want that water to be at an angle to start moving that soil into the cutting so that you got good solid soil cutting contact. So, make sure that they're set up correctly, make sure that all of the holes are clean and that you're not getting this, you can see a very subtle little misconnect because you got some plugging going on here. And with time, we all know what's going to happen. It just becomes more plugged. If you don't start right, you're going to not end right. So I can't stress enough. I just got off of another webinar where the question is, how do I deal with the trays my pots aren't uniformly out in the greenhouse? And it's like, well, it starts back at the flat filler. It starts back at the sowing line, the sticking line. If you don't start uniform there, it's going to be variable for a long time after that. Also, let's see what happens in the greenhouse. Those of you with really sharp eyes can see this is a plug range where they've got this wet spot and then they got these dry spots, and booms go bad. Shocking, huh? Todd, that sometimes they don't last forever. Well, you get wear on the nozzles. So you really need to annually go out there and see, are the nozzles putting out enough water? And of course, you can't see it. If you can see it, you got a big problem. But normally you can't see it. What you have is you need to get something like this red ball pattern check. This is used in the field agriculture industry, available from Wilmer Fabrication. What it does is you lay it down underneath the boom, run the boom a couple of times, and it basically will show you what the pattern is. Of course, these are new spray tips. This is good. This now starts showing worn, and this basically shows probably what a lot of growers, especially this grower, was experiencing in their water boom. So test, 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 and make sure that you're putting on the water correctly, and make sure that you got a target that basically assures that you're there. So let's talk about probably one of the biggest issues that people ignore until they've got a crisis: pest management. So when we talk about pest management, we basically, I think one of the big fallacies I see in most greenhouse operations, they don't have a chemical apothecary. What is a chemical apothecary? We call it an apothecary because it's the chemicals we're using to fix stuff, create a solution to our problem. Just like when you go to the doctor's office, they have an apothecary. They always have certain drugs that they say, if you've got a cough, we give you this. You've got high blood pressure, we give you that. We give a heart, they've got an apothecary. We as an industry need to have an apothecary, and you as an owner and a greenhouse operator need to have an apothecary so that the right chemicals applied to kill the right insect or treat for the right disease. How many times, Todd, have you had a conversation where all of a sudden you're listening to the grower and they're complaining about the chemical control not working, and all of a sudden you realize what?
Oh, wrong chemical, wrong pest. Wrong application method. We see that all the time. And that's what's great about the chart you have down here. There's some really great information that this grower put together. The FRAC group and rotation. I see some mode of action. So what's some of those things that are important?
Yeah, because the groups, we're going to talk about the whole issue of FRAC, and where one of the places you can get them is, I think, Todd, you've got the recent grower talks
Yeah, yeah,
bulletin
yeah.
with insect mite and recommendations, and in that you can get the FRAC groups. So, and they're very important because FRAC groups are the fungicide resistance action committee, which basically says anything that's in a FRAC group 1 basically attacks that disease exactly the same way. So spraying one after one after one, even though it's a bunch of it, as you can see over here, a bunch of different trade names, you're basically going to build up resistance. So it's important to rotate through different FRAC groups for specific diseases. If you basically look for the insect entomologists, they've got the insect resistance, I think they call it action committee. And they have different IRAC mode of actions, and they basically rotate through the IRACs so that you end up with better control. Very important that you have this plan. As we saw in the previous chart, they have the different IRAC and FRAC groups. They also tell you what the different rates are. They tell you whether it's you need a wetting agent. Sometimes we see problems with people putting too much wetting agent. Make sure that they've got the right mode of action, because if it's contact, you better get it on the insect or on contact with the disease, or there's no control. And is there a reentry period for safety? And by the way, what does it kill? If it doesn't treat for that particular problem, don't do it. We had a grower who was incorrectly applying mancozeb, and then was wondering why were they having manganese and zinc toxicity? Well, you don't drench that chemical. So we really have to be very aware of what should we be doing.
Yeah, and another thing to do is to go out and monitor in the greenhouse, right? So this is a grower, and this slide looks a little complicated for those of you looking at the slide presentation today, but it's really not. What they did is they went out and they took their pesticide monitoring cards and they just did the counts on them, and then they graphed them. And what's great about this is they have the different pests in the different colors and shapes you see there on the graph. But what it allows them to do is see when are those pests increasing, and and then they took some notes about specific crops, maybe specific pesticide. this really gives you a visual insight to help prepare for the next season about, you know what, on this week, I really saw thrips starting to increase in my operation. So I need to get out there with a preventative program or something like that. So monitoring those pests and not just looking at the card, but actually taking some information down, making that information usable for the future is a great help. And I really commend this grower for the activity and detail that they did on this project.
Yeah, and that's how you get control. But let's look at also, what about biocontrol?
Yeah, biocontrol is something that we are learning a lot about in the industry. We see a lot more effectiveness in it. We see a lot more folks adopting it. The key to this is prevention. It's a prevention strategy. There are no doubt pests that can, go out there and solve some problems, but if you don't have a prevention mentality, it's not going to work for you. So think about that. It's a holistic program from the day cuttings or seeds arrive to the day it ships out. It's not just to go out there and, treat a problem kind of thing. So, there's been some great information out there on dips. You have some information here. The chart here is from Dr. Rose Buttonhouse from Vineland Research Center up in Canada. And she's been doing a lot of research on dipping URCs when they come in. What can you dip with? What are you preventing? And she's looking at lots of good results that prevent a lot of mite and thrips damage later on in the crops, because there are some hitchhiking pests. No matter how much a farm or a previous supplier was treating those, there's always going to be some out there. And so really showed some excellent results of treating early as a preventative for later, for preventing later problems. So lots of good information. The other thing I will say about pest management and biocontrol, again, we got to get prepared for this because, again, it's a preventative program. But what we're seeing a lot of great success is folks that are using these strategies in with their conventional pesticide applications. So it is a very effective tool for prevention and then also to prevent resistance. You were just mentioning the FRAC and IRAC groups on those different chemicals. Well, here's a great way to insert something else that doesn't even have one of those. It's completely off the chart when it comes to that kind of information. So a great rotation strategy with these guys.
Yeah, and I think what the key here is looking outside of our local area for information. The chemical reps, dig into some work that follow what Rose has done. She's done excellent work. Look at the international results, because remember, in Europe, they have a zero chemical use strategy where they're basically moving towards a chemical-free production. And so they've developed a lot of very innovative ideas and concepts and usable techniques that we need to start incorporating in our own operations. But let's talk about one of the biggest problems we face, because this is where the money is. The money is in shrink. What are you doing to manage shrink? Because shrink, if you think about it, it's all the stuff that we do that we're not getting paid for. If you sit down and you look at what we're doing in our operations, we really have a core group of activities. We take growing inputs, we have a growing process that basically generates finished plants, and then of course plant waste, which is shrink. And then we have some kind of a package distribution process, and that we have a lot of materials and time and effort that we need to do to get everything shipped, because until we have it shipped, we don't make any money. So what we really need to do is break down these various processes and start asking ourselves, how is the varieties we're using? How is the seed, the unrooted cuttings, the young plants? How are all these factors affecting our overall shrink in our operation? So you say, oh yeah, well, yeah, we look at shrink, but let's really take a look at this carefully. I did some trials and studies a number of years ago where I talked to people around the country and asked them, how much loss do you have in different stages, whether it's from the input standpoint, young plant production, finished plant production, losses at retail, and losses at the consumer, just prior to sale. And you start looking at, this is the kinds of shrink numbers on average that they were starting to experience. If we start going and monetize, if the plants didn't die, how much money could we could we have? And so, of course, through calculations, what we see, if you look at the last line, if we could eliminate that 39% shrink in the input, that would generate about another $156 worth of revenue. And then even in young plants, we end up adding another 70, almost $80 of lost revenue in young plants, $48 at finished, $36, and at any one point we really do think, that's not a big deal. But when you start adding it all together at the end, so virtually for almost every dollar we sell, by not managing our shrink, we're throwing away a dollar. Anybody want that dollar? Because that's really where the money is. I mean, I'd take the dollars, guys, if you want to give them to me, I would be more than happy. So really, we need to start thinking about this whole shrink management issue. And of course, now that we've got it monetized, how do we do it? Todd, that growing process, how can we change our growing processes to basically reduce shrink?
Yeah, well, you have some excellent tips here, like the right variety. There are a lot of great new genetics out there that make your production more efficient and more economical. Getting quality inputs and having a strategy like you talked about, Will. But there's 5 factors of plant growth: light, water, nutrition, temperature, and gas exchange. Let's think about what makes a plant grow. Go out in your operation and just think about that. Each of those aspects, light, what's the glazing or your supplemental lighting look like? What's your fertilizer doing? How are you going to use the PGRs and pest management? And think about making those as efficient as possible so we can reduce that shrink.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about getting that right input for a tight finish, because time is money, and that's what we're looking at. The more turns we can have, that first turn is kind of like it happens, okay? But the money is in the second turn, and as anyone saw this past year, that second turn was pure money, because we could sell anything that was marginally even looks, if it had some flowers on it, we could sell it. So we really need to be looking at how can we get that fast turn. Really sit down and look at the cost of using 512s versus a 288 for your finished crop time. Basically, if you use a 288, you can drop a week to 2 weeks off of the finished crop time and turn that faster to give you another turn. So that's really critical. Another thing that we can look at is, when you're using larger containers, because that's the trend that we're seeing, is people want larger and larger containers for that instant bulk, color, where you've got basically a big bulky statement. Well, instead of putting time in, consider throwing more cuttings in. So, throwing an extra plug can basically reduce the crop time by a week. In many cases, throwing an 3 extra plants, you can get bigger, better, have a higher price point. So really stand back and say, is it really make sense that we're keeping these plants around like bad relatives who just stay around and stay around and stay around, and then finally we can ship them? Or should we basically throw a few more plants in there and get them out the door faster? Also consider looking at some of these pre-finished programs for your larger containers, so that you basically can get a pre-finished container, so you're not growing in December and January and February when you've got heating costs, you've got greenhouses that are open but not full. Buy in that pre-finished product that you can then basically do the assembly of that bigger container and then grow it for 4 weeks and then ship it out the door. But what are some other things, Todd, that we can do to basically get the right input set up to give you a tight finish?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about, you're talking about bringing in pre-finished containers or a liner tray or plug tray, such as we see in this photo here. It won't work for all crops, but think about what can I do in that smaller footprint, to save time and money before it's transplanted into those bigger containers. So can I pinch, a liner when it comes in as I'm transplanting, or is it induced? Did I order, a product that, was treated with the right photo period, or do I need to put it in the right photo period in a small container to get started? Also think about pest management and plant growth regulation. You can save a lot of money. 10 flats of 512s can turn into, 30 flats of 1801s really fast. So think about the amount of time and energy and cost you can save by treating products early if it works with your timing and the crop. And also think about, fertilizing that crop before you're transplanting. We've seen really good success of folks who, to irrigate the plugs and liners to get them to the right stage for transplant. If they'll do that with feed, that plug and liner, that root ball is loaded with fertilizer and it's ready to grow once it hits the greenhouse floor. So think about doing that. Treating early, saving time and effort on a smaller footprint.
So let's bring it all home, because really when to be prepared means that you can then react and be fast, fluid, and flexible once we get into the main season. So what do we need to do?
Yeah, let's review kind of what we've talked about today. Disinfecting, sanitation, wash it down. Make sure that your employees and you are not spreading the disease yourself. Okay, take a look at all those, mechanical inputs, the lights, the heaters, and all that kind of stuff. Do you have an action plan in place right now? Preventative, corrective action plan? Do you have a few backup parts and pieces that you may need? We mentioned with water, your fertilizer, your injectors, test your soil, know what it is, you know where you expect it to be. Remember, we can save several weeks of production or problems just by testing and knowing early. Biorational production, we didn't mention that specifically, but this is incorporating some of the biocontrols and softer chemicals into our production strategy. It's a great tool. It helps us with resistance issues, but also a trend that we're going to be seeing more and more in the future. And then shrink management. Will, you did a great job talking about how much money we're actually losing every time we lose a plant. So let's do it, as to the best of our ability to make sure we don't lose it. And then we just summed up there with the efficiency, talking about how can we get a little bit more efficient application of pesticides and things early in the crop production.
So, so a couple PhDs basically, pontificated here for, hopefully only 30 minutes, and on all these great ideas. But, let's bring it home and talk about, how do I do this? I mean, this is just like a million things need to be done. Okay. A couple of our operations, basically they use the PSE method. The management prioritizes what do they feel is the most limiting factor and the most important that needs to get fixed. They basically then said, not just we need to fix this, but what is the expected outcome? We expect 5% reduced shrink. We expect 10% fewer bugs. We expect, we have this prioritized and we have a specific expectation. Then they schedule time to do it. It's not when you want to do it, it needs to be done, and it has a deliverable of this period. We've got this window of time. We're now done with October, so we've got November, December. We got 2 months, effectively 6 weeks to get our act together and be ready for the season. But probably the single most important we found is all those good plans, all those good time doesn't work unless you got buy-in. So what we do in our organizations is we have empowered teams, and the teams aren't just a bunch of managers walking around. It's the people on the floor, the people that are actually doing the job, because those are the people that have to implement these crazy ideas that everyone came up with. But if they come up with the crazy ideas, they come up with ways to do it. They have a little bit of money, instead of giving them 5,000, 10,000, whatever seems appropriate dollars to spend to fix the problem and not just have to bootstrap it. They're more interested in finding workable solutions. So prioritize the issues that need to be fixed. Not everything needs to be fixed, because if you fix everything this year, as one of my operations said, what am I going to do next year? Each year, have a set. We're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then to schedule it, empower people to make it happen. So hopefully this has given everyone a good idea of some things that they can do to get ready for this next spring. And we've got a lot of good things for them also to follow up with in our various podcasts and technical bulletins, right, Bill?
Absolutely. And, you gave so much good information. I was looking at the Q&A. We really don't have any questions, which either means you confused everybody or you really laid it out very clearly and gave them a plan. And I do suspect it's that reason. So thank you guys very much. I really appreciate all of your time and all of the hard work that you put in on this monthly series. I know that each one requires a lot of thought, and you've talked to growers and you've gone through your own experiences. And again, thank you guys very much for all of your time. And I know for a fact it's been valuable because our metrics show that we've had more than 1,000 downloads of these videos. So again, thank you very much to the attendees, and thank you very much to you guys for all that you've shared. I do want to just a quick reminder before we close out for today that all the videos from the Tech on Demands in the Break Room series are collected and posted at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand, or you can go to the Ball Seed YouTube channel and subscribe, and you'll never miss a video. I'd suggest you subscribe because we're going to be putting out a lot more information moving forward. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much. And on behalf of Will and Todd and the rest of the Ball Tech On Demand team, I'm Bill Calkins, thanking you for your attendance and wishing you a fantastic spring season.